He walked into the hospital, bleeding and broken. But what froze him wasn't the pain. It was the sound of two little boys crying for their dying mother. And when he saw her face through the ICU glass, his world shattered. Because the woman fighting for her life was the one he'd left years ago. And those twins carried his eyes. But what came next was something no one was ready for. The gunfire still echoed in his head as Mr. Bairstow pushed through the sliding hospital doors, his coat drenched in rain and blood. The fluorescent lights stung his eyes, flickering like dying stars above him. He could feel every heartbeat pounding against his ribs, each one reminding him he was still alive. Barely. His left hand pressed hard against the bullet wound in his arm, warm blood seeping through his fingers. But he didn't stop. The sterile air of the corridor hit him like ice, cutting through the chaos inside his chest. He wasn't here to heal. He was here to hide, to breathe for a second before the world outside found him again. Yet the silence of the hospital wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that warned of something broken just beyond the next corner. Then, cutting through the static hum of machines and muffled footsteps, came a sound that didn't belong to this world, a child's cry. It wasn't just any cry. It was the kind that carried desperation, the kind that reached into the ribs and twisted something raw. His stride faltered. The blood loss made the corridor blur at the edges, but that sound, high, fragile, heartbreaking, cut through everything. He turned, scanning the benches under the pale glow of the emergency lights, and saw them. Two little boys sat there, huddled together like two lost stars in a storm. One clutched a worn-out teddy bear with a missing ear, its fur darkened from tears. The other pressed his tiny palms together, whispering into the void between sobs, "Please, God, save our Mom." Bairstow froze mid-step. The prayer hit him harder than the bullet lodged in his flesh. The hallway seemed to close in around him, the air thickening with something far heavier than pain. He moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name, each step heavier than the last. His boots squeaked faintly against the tile, and one of the boys looked up. The boy's eyes, sharp, storm gray, met his own. Bairstow stopped breathing. The resemblance wasn't subtle, it was undeniable. The same eyes that had stared back at him from mirrors during sleepless nights, the same shape, the same flicker of defiance and fear. His heart hammered in his chest, not from blood loss now, but from recognition that cut straight to his soul. He blinked hard, telling himself it couldn't be real. Maybe it was the pain playing tricks on him. Maybe it was guilt wearing a child's face. But when the younger boy turned, too, same eyes, same expression, the same small crease between his brows, reality struck with brutal clarity. These boys weren't strangers. They were echoes of his past, echoes of her. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with the copper tang of his blood, making him dizzy. He lowered himself to one knee, trying to steady his shaking hands. The older boy wiped his tears with the back of his small wrist and whispered, "Mister, can you help my Mom?" The words shattered what little strength Bairstow had left. He wanted to speak, to ask who she was, to understand how fate could be this cruel. But his voice cracked before it could form a single syllable. His gaze fell to the clipboard lying beside the bench, a hospital admission file, slightly damp from the rain. A single name was written there in neat black ink, Amelia Reed. The letters blurred as his eyes filled with tears. His pulse roared in his ears. His knees went weak. Amelia. The name carved into his memory, the ghost that haunted every night he tried to forget. For a long moment he couldn't move. He just stared at the file, at the boys, at the universe's cruel sense of timing. His mind screamed for logic. She couldn't be here, not after all these years. Not after he'd left her to protect her from the blood-soaked chaos of his world. But here was the truth, sitting before him in the shape of two children who looked exactly like him. His stomach twisted with guilt. How long had she been alone? How had she survived? The rain outside hammered the windows like gunfire, and somewhere deep inside, he realized he was trembling. The younger twin tugged at his sleeve, his tiny voice cracking through the silence. "Please, mister, she's really sick. She said Daddy used to fix everything. But he's gone now." Bairstow's eyes burned. The words sliced him open because they were true. He was gone. He had vanished from their world the day he walked away from Amelia. A nurse rushed past, pushing a cart of supplies, snapping him out of his daze. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Pain shot through his arm as the wound reopened, fresh blood dripping down his sleeve. The older twin, Leo, according to the tag on his wristband, stepped closer, hesitant but brave. "You're hurt," the boy said softly, his voice shaking with concern. Bairstow forced a faint smile through the pain. "I'll be fine," he lied, though every muscle screamed otherwise. He couldn't take his eyes off them, couldn't stop wondering if Amelia had told them about him. Did they know who he was? Or did she erase him from their lives to keep them safe from the man he had become? The questions clawed at him until the air itself felt too heavy to breathe. Then, chaos erupted down the hallway. A nurse's panicked voice shattered the fragile quiet. "The woman in ICU, Amelia Reed, she's crashing." Bairstow's entire body went cold. The sound of her name, shouted in desperation, hit him like a bullet straight to the chest. The nurse disappeared through a pair of swinging doors, shouting orders for the crash team. The twins froze, eyes wide with fear. The teddy bear fell from the younger one's hand, landing on the floor with a soft thud. Bairstow's pulse thundered in his ears. For a split second, his world narrowed to that single word, crashing. She was alive. She was here. And she was dying. He pushed himself up, ignoring the pain tearing through his arm. The corridor tilted, his vision blurring as his adrenaline kicked in. He could hear his heartbeat in his throat, feel the panic clawing through his veins. Leo called out behind him, "Mister, please don't let her die." But Bairstow was already moving, his boots pounding the floor as he charged toward the ICU doors. Each step was a memory, a regret, a plea. The hallway light strobed overhead, painting him in flashes of white and shadow. His coat trailed behind him like a storm cloud, his breath ragged, his chest on fire. In that moment, it didn't matter that he was bleeding or hunted or broken. The only thing that mattered was the woman he thought he'd lost forever. He reached the ICU doors and slammed his palms against them, leaving bloody prints on the glass. Through the narrow window, he could see doctors crowding around a bed, machines screaming their alarm. He couldn't see her face, only the outline of her hand limp against the white sheets. The nurse shouted for more adrenaline. His vision blurred with tears, the world spinning. His heart clenched as the realization hit him with merciless precision. Amelia wasn't a ghost after all. She was alive, breathing, fighting for her life just a few feet away. And for the first time in 6 years, Bairstow felt something he hadn't felt since the night he left her. Hope. Fragile, burning, dangerous hope. He pressed his forehead to the glass, whispering her name under his breath, the words trembling. "Amelia?" The sound barely left his lips, but his soul screamed it. Behind him, the twins clung to each other, unaware that the man who had just walked into their world was the very father they'd been praying for. The alarms in the ICU blared louder, echoing through the sterile halls like war drums. Bairstow's body trembled as he realized fate wasn't done with him yet. And as the lights above flickered once more, he whispered into the storm inside him, "She's alive!" Then somewhere deep in his chest, a new fear whispered back. But for how long? The sirens inside the ICU screamed like a storm that refused to end. Bairstow stood frozen, his bloodied hands pressed against the glass as chaos erupted on the other side. "Clear!" someone shouted. A flash of light jolted through Amelia's fragile body, her chest rising and falling with every desperate attempt to bring her back. his own heart beat in sync with the rhythm of the machine, like the universe was mocking him. Every beep a question of whether she'd live or die. The hallway felt colder now, his breath fogging the glass, his reflection overlapping hers. Two ghosts divided by nothing but a window and 6 years of regret. He wanted to tear the door off its hinges, to hold her, to tell her that he was sorry for every night she spent alone. But the guards at the end of the hall kept him rooted, and the doctors kept fighting. He leaned his forehead against the glass, whispering her name again like it was a prayer he'd forgotten how to say. "Amelia!" His voice cracked, breaking somewhere between pain and disbelief. He could see her pale face beneath the hospital lights, lifeless, fragile, untouched by the chaos around her. The last time he saw her, she was crying in the rain, begging him not to walk away. He told himself it was mercy, that leaving her would keep her safe from the blood and fire of his world. But as he watched the life drain from her now, he realized mercy was just another word for cowardice. The corridor behind him trembled with small footsteps. He turned, and the sight nearly brought him to his knees. Leo and Liam were holding each other tightly, their faces streaked with tears. They shouldn't have been there, not in a place this cruel. But fate didn't care about innocence. "Mom, please wake up," Liam sobbed, clutching the teddy bear against his chest. The sound tore through Bairstow like a blade. His gaze shifted between the boys and the woman behind the glass, the truth clawing its way to the surface of his mind. The curve of their cheeks, the shape of their eyes, the same shade of brown in their hair as Amelia's. There was no denying it anymore. They weren't strangers. They were his sons. His throat closed as if the realization had stolen all air from the room. He wanted to tell them, to speak the words he'd swallowed for 6 years. But the moment he opened his mouth, his voice broke apart like shattered glass. The only sound that escaped was a raw, painful breath. He looked back at the ICU just as the heart monitor screamed, a sound that silenced everything else. The steady rhythm that had been her lifeline became a flat, piercing tone. The doctor's voice cut through the panic. "We're losing her! Crash cart, now!" Bairstow's knees buckled. His palms hit the floor, smearing blood on the cold tiles as the world tilted violently around him. The twins cried louder, clinging to each other as the nurse rushed them aside. He could barely hear anything over the ringing in his ears. His vision tunneled toward that single, flickering monitor. The woman he had loved, the woman he had left to protect, was dying again. And this time, there was no war, no enemy, no excuse to hide behind. Just fate, cruel and precise. Inside, the doctors worked like soldiers in a losing battle. "Charge to 200, one shouted. The paddles pressed against her chest and her body jerked. Bairstow flinched, his hand tightening against the glass. "Again!" Another shock. Nothing. The sound of flatline was relentless, a scream that seemed to echo inside his skull. He could taste salt on his lips and didn't know if it was sweat or tears. The nurses shouted for oxygen. The doctor called for more adrenaline. Bairstow pressed his palm harder to the glass, whispering through it like his words could reach her heart. "Don't do this, Amelia, not again. Don't leave me like this." The lights overhead flickered, matching the rhythm of his fading hope. He remembered the night he walked away, how she'd stood barefoot on the porch, rain soaking through her hair, her voice trembling as she'd said, "One day you'll regret this." He'd turned away then, believing he was sparing her pain. Now he wished she had hated him instead, because love made this unbearable. He banged his fist against the glass once, twice, leaving a smear of blood and desperation. A guard shouted, but he didn't care. The world had already ended once. It could end again. Behind him, the twins sobbed into each other's arms. "Mom, please wake up," Leo whispered, his voice small but filled with a kind of strength only a child could carry. Bairstow turned his head slowly, his heart twisting at the sight. He wanted to hold them, to tell them that everything would be okay, but the words felt like lies. He didn't deserve their trust. He didn't even deserve to breathe the same air as them. All he could do was watch as the woman who had once been his entire world lay lifeless before their eyes. The doctor's voice grew quieter now, almost resigned. "We're losing her pulse." Bairstow's body went cold. He pressed both palms against the glass, blood streaking down the surface as he shouted her name, "Amelia!" It came out broken, but it carried every ounce of his soul. The sound made the twins flinch. They looked at him through their tears, confusion written across their faces. Liam whispered, "Why is that man crying for Mommy?" Leo, older but just as lost, shook his head. "I don't know, but he looks like he misses her." Bairstow sank to the floor, his head in his hands. The pain in his arm was nothing compared to the agony crushing his chest. The corridor spun around him. The hum of machines blurred into static. He felt like the walls were closing in, suffocating him under years of silence and regret. The nurse ran past with a tray of syringes, bumping his shoulder, but he didn't even feel it. He was drowning in memories. Her laughter, her warmth, the way she used to fall asleep on his chest while the world outside burned. Every moment replayed now, cruelly mocking him for ever thinking he could live without her. "Call it," a voice said inside the ICU. Those two words snapped him out of his haze. His head jerked up, eyes wide with terror. The doctor's hand hovered over the clock. "Time of death." Bairstow slammed his fist into the glass, his voice a thunderous roar. "No! Don't you dare!" The room froze for a heartbeat. Everyone turned, startled by the raw desperation in his tone. The nurse hesitated, eyes flicking between the lifeless woman on the bed and the man outside who looked like he'd lost the reason to exist. Bairstow's chest heaved, his breath ragged. His world had narrowed to a single point, the line on the monitor. He whispered under his breath again, softer this time, almost pleading, "Come on, Amelia. Fight. You've always fought." He pressed his forehead to the glass once more, his tears mixing with the blood on the pane. The lights flickered again, thunder rolled outside, and for a fleeting second, he thought he saw her fingers twitch. Or maybe it was just his heart begging for a miracle. The flatline continued. The doctor's hand dropped, shoulders sagging in defeat. A nurse covered Amelia's chest with trembling hands, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The sound broke him completely. His knees hit the floor again, the impact jolting through his bones. The twins wailed, their cries echoing through the hallway like a chorus of grief, too pure for words. Bairstow bowed his head, fists clenched so tight his knuckles bled. He had fought wars, buried enemies, ruled empires built on fear. But this helplessness, destroyed him more than any bullet ever could. He looked up one last time, his vision hazy, and whispered into the stillness, "You were my only reason to change." The monitor remained silent, unyielding. The doctor turned away, whispering instructions for the paperwork. Nurses moved slowly, their faces pale with sorrow. Bairstow's eyes locked on Amelia's face, memorizing every curve, every fragile detail. The glass separated them, but the pain that connected them was infinite. He pressed his hand flat one final time, leaving a bloody handprint on the window between them, a mark of a love that refused to die, even when she had. As he sat there, drenched in grief and blood, the world outside went silent. Even the storm seemed to pause. And then, without warning, the faintest flicker of a sound broke through the air, a tiny blip, then another. The monitor beeped once, twice. His head snapped up, eyes widening in disbelief. The doctors turned, frozen mid-step. Hope trembled in the air like lightning before a storm. Bairstow's lips parted, a whisper escaping before he could stop it. "Amelia!" The nurse gasped. "We've got a pulse!" And just like that, the world began to breathe again, unsteady, fragile, but alive. The shrill echo of the monitor's beeping tore through the stillness like a breath returning to a corpse. Bairstow's head snapped up, disbelief etched across his blood-streaked face. The doctors froze for a heartbeat before springing back into motion, voices trembling with urgency and awe. "We've got a pulse. She's responding." The nurse grabbed the defibrillator pads again, adjusting the rhythm, her eyes wide with hope and exhaustion. Bairstow's chest constricted painfully, his heart thundering as though trying to match hers beat for beat. For one impossible moment, he forgot the blood seeping from his arm, the coldness beneath his knees, the screams in his head. All he saw was the faint rise of her chest, the fragile proof that Amelia was still fighting. He pressed both palms flat against the glass, his reflection merging with the chaos inside. "That's it. Come on, love," he whispered hoarsely, his breath fogging the surface. His voice shook with every syllable, trembling between prayer and desperation. The doctors surrounded her, their movements a blur of determination. The heart monitor steadied, weak but persistent, a fragile symphony of survival. Bairstow's shoulders sagged as a sob escaped him, raw, unguarded. The weight crushing his chest began to loosen, replaced by something he hadn't felt in years: hope. He exhaled shakily, the sound more like a broken laugh. "You stubborn woman," he murmured under his breath, a faint smile trembling through his tears. "Even death can't take you without a fight." His vision blurred again, not from pain this time, but from gratitude so fierce it hurt. For 6 years he had lived as a ghost, breathing but not alive, powerful but empty. And now, in the most unlikely corner of a sterile hospital, the one heartbeat that had once anchored his world had found its rhythm again. Behind him, a faint tug at his sleeve pulled him back to the present. He looked down to find Liam standing there, small and trembling, his tiny hand slipping into Bairstow's without hesitation. The warmth of that touch cut deeper than any bullet. The boy's eyes were red from crying, his lips quivering as he spoke. She said she still loves someone who broke her heart. Bairstow's breath caught in his throat. The words echoed inside him like a confession he didn't deserve to hear. He stared at the boy, stunned, the meaning sinking like lead into his chest. Amelia had spoken about him. After all these years, she still remembered, still loved, still hurt. He wanted to answer, to tell Liam that he was the man who broke her heart and that he'd give his life to mend it. But the words stayed trapped behind his teeth. He wasn't sure he deserved forgiveness, even if she lived. Instead, he knelt down, his eyes level with the boy's. "Your mom's stronger than anyone I've ever known," he said softly, his voice trembling but sure. "She's going to make it." Liam nodded faintly, clutching the teddy bear tighter. "Do you promise?" Bairstow's throat burned. He nodded once, slow and certain. "I promise." The doctor's voice broke through the silence again, sharp with relief. "Her vitals are stabilizing. We're in the clear for now." The words struck like sunlight after endless night. Bairstow's eyes flicked back toward the glass. Amelia's face, pale and delicate beneath the mask, seemed to glow faintly under the soft hum of machines. Her fingers twitched once, as if reaching for something beyond her dreams. He pressed his forehead to the window, tears streaking down his face. "Stay with me, Amelia," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm not ready to lose you again, not when I just found you." The storm outside raged on, thunder rolling over the city like distant artillery. The lights in the corridor flickered again, but inside Bairstow's chest, something had reignited, a purpose, a pulse, a vow. He leaned his head against the glass, his body trembling with exhaustion. Every inch of him screamed in pain, but his heart was alive. Burning fiercely. The sound of the steady beat behind the glass became a rhythm he couldn't look away from, a heartbeat tethered to his own. Hours blurred. The adrenaline faded, leaving only silence and fatigue. The hospital corridor, once filled with chaos, settled into a fragile calm. Bairstow sank to the floor, his back against the wall, watching through half-lidded eyes as Amelia's chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. The twins curled beside him, their small bodies pressed into his sides, their heads resting against his arms. The weight of them grounded him in a way he hadn't felt in years. Leo's breathing slowed first, then Liam's, until both boys drifted into the kind of deep sleep only innocence could allow. He glanced down at them, two tiny pieces of her, sleeping against a man they didn't yet know was their father. The thought broke him open all over again. He brushed a hand gently over Leo's hair, his thumb tracing the curve of the boy's ear. They even had Amelia's eyelashes, long and dark, like shadows painted by love. His throat tightened painfully. "I'll protect you," he whispered to them, his voice barely audible over the hum of machines. "Both of you, even if it costs me everything." The words were more than a promise. They were a vow carved straight from his soul. For a long time he sat there in the dim light, the twins sleeping peacefully, the woman he loved fighting her way back to him. He should have felt relief, but a strange unease tugged at him instead. Years in the underworld had taught him that peace was never real. It was just the quiet before something worse. The hairs on the back of his neck rose as instinct stirred. That old, dangerous intuition that had kept him alive in countless ambushes. He looked toward the darkened window at the end of the hallway, but saw nothing. Only his reflection, tired, hollow, covered in blood. Still, something in his gut told him they weren't alone. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. It poured relentlessly, washing the city in silver and shadow. Across the street, parked beneath a broken streetlight, sat a black car with tinted windows. The engine hummed softly, barely audible under the storm. Inside, two figures sat cloaked in darkness. One of them held binoculars, their lenses reflecting the pale light from the hospital window. Through them, Bairstow's silhouette was clear, the broken man watching the woman he loved, with two children curled against him. "Target confirmed," the figure in the passenger seat whispered. Their voice was calm, cold. The driver didn't respond, only lifted a phone to his ear. The device buzzed once before a deep voice answered on the other end. "Report." "She's alive," the driver said, eyes fixed on the glowing hospital window. There was a pause, then a single sentence delivered with chilling precision. "Then finish it." The line went dead. The passenger exhaled slowly, reaching into his coat. A faint metallic click followed, the unmistakable sound of a weapon being loaded. The rain muffled everything else. The car lights flickered once before the engine died, leaving the street in absolute darkness. Inside, oblivious to the danger drawing closer, Bairstow shifted slightly, his arm curling protectively around the twins. He closed his eyes for the first time in hours, exhaustion claiming him. Through the glass, Amelia's chest continued to rise and fall, each breath fragile but steady. The machines whispered her life into the room like a promise kept. Thunder rumbled overhead, and lightning flashed across the skyline, illuminating the black car for a split second before plunging it back into shadow. Somewhere in that darkness, a hand reached for the door handle. The faint sound of metal against metal echoed beneath the rain. Back inside, Bairstow stirred, his instincts twitching again. His eyes opened, scanning the hallway. Something felt wrong, the kind of wrong that didn't belong in hospitals. He rose slowly, careful not to wake the boys, his gaze drawn to the faint silhouette beyond the rain-streaked window. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a shape shifting near the parking lot. Then it was gone. The storm swallowed everything. He turned back toward Amelia's room, pressing his hand against the glass once more, grounding himself in the sound of her heartbeat. "I'm here," he whispered, voice low but fierce, "and I swear no one will touch you again." His reflection stared back at him, bloodied, exhausted, but unbroken. Outside, the rain fell harder, masking the footsteps approaching from the shadows, and as the thunder rolled one last time, the faint red glow of a cigarette flared to life in the darkness, a silent promise that the night's peace was already over. The rain hadn't stopped. It came down like punishment from the heavens, heavy, unrelenting, merciless. Bairstow stepped out of the hospital's back door, the cold biting through his shirt, the metallic tang of blood mixing with the scent of asphalt and gunpowder still clinging to his skin. His wound burned, the bandage long soaked through, but pain was a companion he had made peace with long ago. He tilted his face toward the downpour, letting the rain wash over him as lightning tore the sky apart. Somewhere in that flash of white, he made his choice. If the ghosts of his past wanted Amelia silenced, then tonight he would become their ghost. He walked into the storm like it belonged to him. The city, once a blur of neon and noise, now felt like a battlefield. Every shadow hid a memory. Every alley reeked of betrayal. Water pooled under his boots, rippling with every step he took. His breath steamed against the night, each exhale filled with purpose. They had come for her. That was their last mistake. A black car waited at the far end of the block, its engine still warm from the hunt. He moved closer, silent as the rain. Through the windshield, he could see the faint glow of a cigarette, the same red ember he'd seen earlier from the hospital window. His pulse slowed, steady, cold. He reached into his coat, fingers brushing the grip of his gun. For a moment, thunder drowned the world, and when the sound faded, so did the man inside the car. The gunfire was brief, efficient, and merciless. One shot, then two. The passenger slumped forward against the dashboard, smoke curling from his temple. Bairstow exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon, but his eyes stayed sharp. He knew this was only one layer of rot. The real infection ran deeper. Somewhere, someone had ordered the hit, and he intended to rip the truth out of them before the night was done. The rain blurred the blood into crimson rivers that ran toward the gutters. He turned, walking deeper into the alleys, his silhouette dissolving into darkness. Each footstep echoed through puddles and distant sirens, a heartbeat of vengeance. He traced the path he knew too well, old connections, forgotten enemies, faces that used to smile before they betrayed him. The underworld had memory, and tonight, it would remember his name. In a back street lit by a flickering sign, he found them, the ones sent to clean up the mess. 3 men, armed but careless, smoking under the awning of a shuttered bar. Bairstow didn't speak. He stepped from the shadows, lightning casting his figure in pale fire. Their eyes widened. One reached for his weapon, but it was already over. The first man went down before the second even blinked. The third ran, slipping through puddles, his boots splashing panic across the night. Bairstow followed, silent, relentless, the predator he once swore he'd never be again. The chase cut through narrow lanes and dripping fire escapes, until finally the man stumbled into a dead end, a wall of graffiti and rain. He turned, gun trembling, his voice cracking. You're supposed to be dead!" Bairstow stepped closer, the rain plastering his hair to his face, his eyes dark as the storm. "I was," he said quietly, "until you touched what's mine." The muzzle flash lit the alley like lightning, and the thunder that followed was the final note in a requiem for the damned. When silence returned, it was almost reverent. He stood there for a long moment, chest heaving, the rain turning the alley into a mirror of red and silver. Somewhere, a church bell rang faintly through the storm, a cruel reminder that dawn wasn't far. But Bairstow didn't feel redemption. He felt empty. Revenge had never been justice. It was only survival with sharper teeth. He looked down at his shaking hands and saw Amelia's face in his mind, her lips pale, her body bound to machines. His knees weakened. Killing them hadn't eased the guilt. It had only made the silence louder. He holstered the gun and turned back toward the direction of the hospital, the city stretching before him like a maze of sorrow. The rain soaked through his coat, chilling him to the bone, but he kept walking. Each step grew heavier, not from the wound or fatigue, but from the memories clawing at him. Her laughter, the last time she looked at him before he left, the night he thought he was saving her by walking away, when in truth, he was just breaking her heart. By the time the hospital's pale glow appeared through the rain, his body trembled with exhaustion. The blood loss had caught up to him, the world around him swaying with each step. He reached the doors, pushing them open with a strength that shouldn't have been possible, guided only by guilt and need. Inside, the fluorescent light hit him like a blade. He winced, blinking against it. The sterile corridors felt alien compared to the storm he had just survived. He walked down the hallway, his boots leaving wet prints that trailed behind him like evidence of his sins. The night nurse looked up in shock. His coat was torn, his knuckles raw, his face streaked with mud and rain. "Sir, you need medical—" she started, but one look from his eyes silenced her. He wasn't there for help. He was there for her. When he reached the ICU, he paused at the glass. Amelia lay just as he left her, still fragile, her skin pale under the hum of the monitors. But something inside him shifted when he saw what lay just outside her door. Two small figures curled against the wall, asleep. Leo and Liam. They had used her scarf as a blanket, its floral fabric wrapped around them like a memory of warmth. His chest tightened until it hurt. He stepped closer, his boots whispering against the floor. The sight of them, her children, his sons, nearly broke him. Leo stirred first, rubbing his eyes sleepily, then blinked up at him. Recognition wasn't there yet, but trust was. The boy's voice came out soft, groggy. "Mister?" Bairstow knelt beside them, his heart shattering all over again. "Hey," he whispered, "you two should be in bed." Liam shifted beside his brother, clutching the scarf tighter. His voice was even softer. "We didn't want to leave her." Bairstow swallowed hard, nodding. "Neither did I." His hand trembled as he brushed a damp curl from Liam's forehead. He had no right to touch them, no claim to their lives, yet something inside him ached with the purest instinct to protect, to hold, to never let go again. He lowered himself onto one knee, his breath unsteady. "I should have been here," he whispered, almost to himself. The words fell heavy in the silence, heavier than any bullet he'd ever fired. Leo blinked, curiosity flickering in his sleepy eyes. "Are you our dad?" The question struck him harder than any wound. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His throat tightened, a storm of guilt and longing colliding inside him. He looked at them. Their eyes, the shape of their jaws, the familiar spark in their gaze, and he didn't need a DNA test to know. They were his. Every feature was a cruel reflection of his absence. Tears blurred his vision. He opened his mouth, finally ready to speak the truth he'd buried for years. Before the word could leave him, the sound of the heart monitor cut through the air, a sudden, sharp spike. The line on the screen jumped, beeping wildly. His head snapped toward the glass. Amelia's fingers twitched, once, twice. Her eyelids fluttered, slow, fragile, uncertain. The nurse on duty gasped, rushing toward her bed. "Doctor, she's responding!" Bairstow's breath stopped in his chest. He staggered to his feet, pressing his hand against the glass, his heart pounding harder than the storm outside. The twins turned toward the sound, eyes wide, the scarf slipping from their hands. "Mom?" Leo whispered, his voice trembling. Inside the ICU, Amelia's eyes flickered open, soft brown meeting the cold, fluorescent light. For a moment, she seemed lost between life and dream. Then her gaze drifted toward the window, toward him. Their eyes met. For the first time in 6 years, the world stopped moving. The storm outside fell silent, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Her lips parted slightly, a whisper escaping that fogged the oxygen mask. His name. Bairstow's knees almost gave way. Relief, disbelief, and love crashed into him all at once, violent and beautiful. He pressed his palm against the glass, his voice breaking. Amelia. But before hope could take root, the monitors behind her spiked again. Wild, erratic. Nurses shouted orders. A doctor rushed in, barking for sedatives. Her pulse soared dangerously, her body trembling. "Her system's in shock," the doctor yelled. Bairstow's heart dropped. He slammed his fist against the glass. "Don't let her slip away now." Her gaze locked on his one last time, her lips moving behind the mask, forming words only he could read. "I waited for you." Then her body went still, and the alarms began to scream. The world seemed to freeze between the steady hum of machines and the echo of her whisper. Bairstow. The sound of his name on her lips, fragile, trembling, shattered 6 years of silence like glass under pressure. His heart lurched, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. Every scar, every sleepless night, every drop of blood spilled for survival. All of it led to this single heartbeat. He took a hesitant step closer, his boots silent against the polished floor, his throat tight with emotion. She looked unreal in that hospital bed, her skin pale but her eyes alive again, flickering with disbelief and memory. He swallowed hard, the words tumbling out, half a confession, half a prayer. "You're alive, Amelia." The tears that welled in her eyes weren't just of shock, they were the ghosts of pain she'd buried in his absence. Her fingers trembled against the bedsheet, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, cracked, yet laced with a storm of emotions. "Why are you here?" Her question pierced deeper than any bullet ever had. He moved closer, close enough to feel the faint warmth of her breath, and said, his voice low but unshaken, "Because I never stopped being yours." For a moment, her chest rose sharply, and a tear slid down her temple. She turned her face away, staring at the ceiling as if the truth hurt more than the pain in her body. "You left," she whispered. "You left when I needed you the most." Her voice broke, the weight of years collapsing into that single sentence. His jaw clenched, guilt pressing into his bones like fire. "I left to save you," he murmured. "You don't know how many enemies were watching, waiting to destroy anything I loved. I thought if I disappeared, you'd be safe." Her eyes flicked toward him, filled with anger and sorrow. "And was I?" she asked bitterly. "Do I look safe to you?" The silence between them thickened, not empty but crowded, with memories, regrets, love that refused to die even when they tried to bury it. He stepped closer still, his fingers brushing the side of her hand. She didn't pull away, but her body stiffened as if torn between wanting to push him away and wanting to fall into him. "Amelia," he said softly, his voice breaking for the first time, "I didn't know you'd kept my name on your lips." She blinked, tears clinging to her lashes. "I never forgot your shadow," she replied, barely a whisper. The hum of the machines filled the space, each beep echoing like a heartbeat between them. The air felt electric, charged with everything they'd never said. She turned her face back toward him, her gaze trembling between forgiveness and fear. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered suddenly, urgency tightening her voice. "Bairstow, you shouldn't be here." His brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Her hand clutched at his sleeve, weak but desperate. "They'll kill you if they know you're here," she said, her breath coming fast, panic rising with every word. "They're still watching. They never stopped." His pulse quickened, but his expression didn't waver. He leaned closer until his shadow fell over her, his voice lowering to a tone that could slice through steel. "Let them come." The words weren't bravado. They were a promise carved out of rage and devotion. But before he could say another word, the air in the room shifted. The light above the doorway flickered once, twice, then steadied. A faint creak echoed down the hall, soft but distinct, like a warning carried on the wind. Bairstow's instincts sharpened instantly. His gaze darted toward the door, muscles tensing, senses locking onto every movement. Through the glass reflection on the opposite wall, he saw it, a shadow, subtle but there, moving with purpose. Someone was standing just beyond the threshold. The door handle twitched almost imperceptibly, and in that suspended moment, everything inside him went still. He turned slightly, positioning himself between Amelia and the door, his voice a low command. "Stay down." Amelia's eyes widened in terror. "Bairstow, no." But it was already too late. The door swung open, slow at first, deliberate, and from the darkness of the hall emerged a man drenched in rain. His coat glistening under the sterile hospital light. His face was half hidden under the brim of a cap, but the gleam of cold metal in his hand said everything. The gun caught the light, its silencer gleaming like a whisper of death. The man's gaze swept the room, cold and detached, landing finally on Bairstow. "You made this easy," he said, voice flat, emotionless. Bairstow's stance shifted, his hand inching toward the holster hidden beneath his coat. His voice was a controlled growl. "You picked the wrong ghost to chase." The assassin smirked faintly, raising the gun. "Orders are orders. She was supposed to stay dead." Amelia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The world contracted to a single point, the space between the barrel and Bairstow's heart. Then the silence broke with a flash of movement. Bairstow lunged to the side as the silenced shot fired, the bullet slicing through the curtain behind him. The glass shattered in a spray of soundless shards. He ducked low, pulling Amelia's bedbrake, shoving it aside to shield her as another suppressed shot hissed through the air. The nurse at the desk screamed and hit the alarm, the sound of chaos erupting in the hall. Bairstow drew his gun in a smooth motion, his eyes blazing with fury and focus. Amelia reached out weakly, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't." "It's already started," he said, his voice like thunder cracking through calm. The assassin stepped forward, expression unreadable. "You should have stayed gone, Bairstow. The syndicate doesn't leave loose ends." The mention of that name, the syndicate, lit something feral in his eyes. "Then I'll be the ghost that ends it," he said, and in the next second lightning flashed outside the window, casting both men in violent silhouettes. The assassin raised his gun again, but Bairstow was already moving. The world exploded into motion. The hiss of suppressed gunfire, the crash of metal, the scream of alarms. Nurses ran for cover. Amelia tried to sit up, her pulse monitor blaring as her trembling hands reached toward him. "Bairstow!" she cried, but her voice drowned under the chaos. He rolled across the floor, fired once, twice. The first missed by inches, the second struck the attacker's shoulder. The man stumbled, dropping to one knee but not going down. Blood splattered across the tiles, mixing with the rainwater Bairstow had brought in. "You're a dead man!" the assassin snarled, but Bairstow's reply was calm, deadly. "You're late." Their eyes locked, two predators in the sterile white of a place meant for healing, not killing. Then the assassin reached into his coat, not for another weapon, but a small black device blinking red. Bairstow froze, realization dawning too late. "No," he breathed. The assassin's smirk widened. "If I die, this whole floor burns." The beeping grew faster. Bairstow's grip on his gun tightened, his mind racing. Amelia's terrified voice broke through the chaos. "Bairstow, what is that?" His eyes snapped to hers, pain and determination colliding in one look. "A message," he said grimly. "They're not after revenge. They're sending a warning." And then the device beeped one last time. A flash, a shockwave. The windows burst outward, fire blooming in the corridor as smoke swallowed the lights. The explosion shook the ICU. Alarm screaming as the ceiling rained debris. Bairstow dove for Amelia, covering her with his body as glass and flame filled the room. The world roared around them, and his only thought, the only sound in his heart, was her name. The explosion consumes the ICU, the assassin vanishes into smoke, and Bairstow and Amelia are trapped under the wreckage as the fire spreads. The explosion ripped through the night like the earth itself was screaming. Fire bloomed in the corridor, swallowing the sterile white walls in orange fury. The blast hurled Bairstow and Amelia across the room, his body shielding hers as debris rained from the ceiling. The impact knocked the air from his lungs, the heat scorching his back, but he didn't move. He wouldn't. The roar of destruction drowned everything, yet through it all, he could still hear the fragile, terrified sound of her heartbeat beneath him. For a second, he thought she was gone. Then he heard her gasp, weak, trembling, alive. Relief washed through him like a shockwave, stronger than the blast itself. He lifted his head, smoke burning his eyes, and saw flames licking the edges of the curtains, spreading fast. The ICU had become a war zone again, and he knew this time there was no army coming to save them. There was only him. He pulled Amelia close, wrapping an arm around her waist as he rose to his knees. "Stay with me," he said hoarsely, coughing through the smoke. She tried to speak, but the oxygen mask had torn loose. Her lips moved soundlessly, her eyes wide with fear. The fire alarm screamed overhead, and the smell of burning plastic filled the air. Somewhere outside, voices shouted, nurses, orderlies, chaos everywhere. He could barely hear them through the pounding in his head. The walls groaned, tiles cracking from the heat. He grabbed a fallen metal tray, smashing the glass of the side window with one brutal swing. The rain outside rushed in, steam exploding where it met the fire. He turned to her, his face streaked with blood and soot. "We have to move." She nodded faintly, her fingers clutching his sleeve. He lifted her gently, ignoring the pain ripping through his side where shrapnel had torn his flesh. Every step toward that broken window felt like dragging himself through hell, but his resolve burned brighter than the flames. Behind them, the fire spread faster, climbing the walls, devouring the machines that once kept her alive. He reached the window, the cool rain slapping his face, and lowered her to the ledge. She looked at him, tears mixing with soot on her cheeks. "Bairstow." He shook his head quickly. "Don't talk, just breathe." She swallowed, her voice barely audible. "Why? Why are you always the one saving me?" His eyes softened for a fleeting heartbeat. "Because I'm the one who broke you." Then a sound cut through the chaos, a click, sharp, distinct. He froze, head snapping toward the door. A shadow emerged through the haze, another intruder dressed in black tactical gear, moving with the precision of a trained killer. Bairstow shoved Amelia flat against the wall and drew his gun, firing without hesitation. The first shot missed, shattering a monitor. The second caught the man in the chest, but he didn't fall. The body armor took the hit. The intruder raised his weapon, and Bairstow barely dove aside as bullets shredded the IV stands beside him. He rolled across the floor, came up firing, each pull of the trigger a vow carved in lead. The assassin staggered, but still advanced, relentless. Bairstow's clip emptied with a metallic click. The man raised his gun for the killing shot, then his body jerked suddenly. A red bloom spread across his throat, and he fell, lifeless. Bairstow blinked, stunned, then followed the trajectory of the bullet to the doorway. Smoke parted, and behind it stood a nurse, terrified, trembling, holding a gun she clearly didn't know how to use. Her hands shook, eyes wide with shock. He was going to kill you," she stammered. Bairstow gave a short nod, moving toward her, taking the weapon gently from her trembling fingers. "You just saved us both." Her tears fell freely now, fear spilling out in sobs. "We have to get her out," she cried, pointing to Amelia. "The fire's spreading." Bairstow turned, his gaze snapping back to Amelia, who was slumped against the wall, coughing violently. He ran to her, pulling her up again, his muscles screaming in protest. "Come on, love. Stay awake for me." The endearment slipped out before he could stop it. Her eyelids fluttered, her strength fading. "Our sons," she whispered, and the words stopped him cold. He looked down at her, confusion flickering across his face. "What did you say?" She looked up at him, her lips trembling. "Our sons," she repeated weakly. Liam, they're yours." For a heartbeat, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The firelight danced in her eyes, but all he saw was the reflection of his past catching up to him in the most brutal, beautiful way. His sons. The truth hit him harder than the explosion, a rush of love and guilt and shock. His voice broke when he finally spoke. "You knew all this time?" She nodded faintly, her tears cutting clean trails down her soot-streaked face. "I tried to tell you, but you were gone." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Then let me fight for them now," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of 6 lost years. She smiled faintly, a small broken smile that still managed to shatter him. "Just don't die trying." He pressed his forehead to hers, eyes closing for a moment as the chaos burned around them. "Not today," he breathed. "Not before I make this right." Outside, the wail of police sirens pierced through the thunder, growing louder by the second. The sprinklers finally engaged, showering the room in cold water, turning the smoke into a choking fog. The door burst open as firefighters and officers flooded in, shouting orders, weapons drawn. Bairstow stood over her protectively, his hands raised slowly, his expression unreadable. "Don't shoot," one of the paramedics shouted. "He's helping her!" But the cops didn't lower their guns. They recognized him. The name that carried 1,000 rumors, the face from every wanted file. "On your knees!" one barked. He hesitated, his gaze flicking to Amelia. Her eyes were wide, pleading silently. Slowly he obeyed, lowering himself beside her bed. His voice was steady, though his heart thundered with dread. "Tell them the truth," he said softly, his gaze locked with hers. "Tell them I'm not your enemy." She nodded weakly, her lips parting to speak, but her words were drowned by the chaos of radios and shouts. 2 officers moved in, pulling his arms behind him, cold metal snapping around his wrists. He didn't resist. His eyes never left hers as they dragged him toward the door. "Bairstow!" she cried, trying to reach for him, but her body refused to move. He gave her a faint, pained smile. "Stay alive for them," he said. "That's all that matters now." The officers shoved him forward, out into the rain-soaked corridor, past the broken glass and flashing red lights. Outside the hospital, sirens wailed. Emergency lights painted the night in chaos. He looked up once, the rain washing blood from his face, when movement caught his eye. A flicker on the rooftop across the street. Instinct kicked in. His body tensed, his vision sharpening. There, under the glow of lightning, a dark silhouette moved, a sniper, steady, precise. The barrel of the rifle aimed straight at him. Time seemed to slow. He could hear the soft creak of the trigger being pulled back. His voice tore through the storm. "Get down!" But the officers beside him didn't understand, not until the thunder cracked again, and the muzzle flash illuminated the night. The shot rang out, silent but deadly, slicing through the downpour straight toward him. And in that fraction of a second before impact, all he could think of was Amelia, her whisper, her tears, and the promise he'd made. The sniper's bullet flies toward Bairstow as Amelia screams from inside the burning ICU, the world holding its breath between love and fire. The world exploded in a single merciless sound. The crack of the rifle split the air, louder than thunder, sharper than pain. Glass shattered in a violent bloom, shards spiraling like frozen rain. Bairstow jerked backward as the bullet tore through the storm and found its mark. His body hit the wet floor with a hollow thud, crimson spreading beneath him like a terrible sunrise. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then came the scream. Amelia's voice, raw, fractured, primal. It ripped through the smoke and chaos, through the storm outside, through the years of silence that had once separated them. No! She fell from the bed, dragging the IV lines with her, her bare feet slipping on blood and broken glass. Every motion was agony, but nothing could stop her. She crawled toward him, her hands trembling, her heart shattering with every inch that closed the distance. Bairstow's body convulsed once, his hand rising weakly, reaching for her through the blur of pain. Their fingers met halfway, slick with blood and rain. "Don't," he gasped, his breath rattling in his throat. "Don't cry." The words were barely a whisper, but they cut deeper than any scream. His eyes, half open, searched for her face like it was the only light left in the world. She pressed her hand to his wound, sobbing, her voice breaking. "Stay with me, please, stay with me." The corridor was chaos. Officers shouting, medics flooding in, alarms shrieking, but in her world there was only him. Bairstow smiled faintly, blood staining his lips. "You're still beautiful," he murmured, his voice fading. "You're losing too much blood," a doctor shouted, pushing her aside, but she clung to him with a desperate strength no one could tear away. Then, amid the confusion, two small voices pierced through the noise. "Dad!" It was Leo and Liam, running barefoot, their eyes wide with terror. They threw themselves beside him, their little hands gripping his arm, their tears mixing with the rain that poured through the shattered window. The sound of that word, Dad, hit Amelia like lightning. It was the first time they had ever said it, the first time they had given voice to what she had long kept buried. Bairstow's head turned slightly, his eyes finding theirs through the haze of pain. Something soft broke through his expression, a flicker of warmth in the middle of his dying storm. "My boys," he breathed, the faintest smile touching his lips. His hand rose shakily, brushing through Leo's hair, leaving a streak of blood across his son's cheek. Amelia gripped his other hand tighter, her tears falling fast. "Don't you dare leave me now," she whispered fiercely. "Not like this, not again." His breathing grew shallow, his chest trembling with each exhale. "I told you. I'd find you," he whispered, the corners of his mouth lifting in a faint, tired smile. "And you did," she said, pressing her forehead against his. "You found us. You found your family." His eyelids fluttered, his strength fading. "Worth it," he murmured, "every scar. Worth it." Then his hand fell limp. The monitor beside him flatlined, a long, unbroken note that cut through her soul like a blade. Amelia froze. The sound devoured her. The world blurred into nothing but that endless, screaming line of death. Her body shook, her hands trembling as she gripped his face. "No, no, no," she sobbed, pressing her forehead against his. "You promised me. You said not today." Her tears soaked his shirt, mixing with his blood until they were indistinguishable. "Come back," she begged, her voice breaking into 1,000 shards. "Please, come back to me." The twins cried beside her, their small voices trembling. "Mom, fix him! Please, fix Dad!" Their innocence shattered her heart. She screamed again, raw and broken, the sound echoing down the hospital corridor like a dying soul's prayer. Doctors rushed in, shouting orders, dragging carts, defibrillators sparking to life. "We've lost him, charging now!" Amelia was pulled back, but she fought them, clawing to stay near him. "No, he's still there, I can feel it." Her nails scraped the tiles as they held her back. The doctor pressed the paddles to Bairstow's chest. "Clear!" The jolt lifted his body off the floor, then dropped him again. Nothing. "Charge to 300! Clear!" The second shock slammed through him, his body arching once more, then falling still. The monitor stayed flat. The doctor's voice dropped, defeated. "I'm sorry." Amelia's knees buckled, her cries collapsing into whispers. She crawled forward again, defying their hands, pressing her ear to his chest. Nothing. No heartbeat. Only silence. She cupped his face in her trembling palms, her lips shaking as she whispered, "You can't leave me like this, you stubborn man, you can't." The twins clung to her arms, crying into her gown. "Dad, please wake up," Liam sobbed. "We'll be good, we promise." Her vision blurred from tears, the room spinning, and then a sound, a faint, irregular beep. At first she thought it was her imagination, but then it came again, louder, stronger. "Wait, look!" a nurse shouted. "We've got a pulse!" Amelia's head snapped up, disbelief flooding her face. The doctor leaned over Bairstow, eyes wide. "He's fighting!" Another beep, then another. The line began to flicker back to life, small, uncertain, but alive. Amelia covered her mouth, sobbing with relief. "Oh God, he's fighting!" She grabbed his hand again, pressing it to her heart. "Don't stop. Do you hear me? Don't stop now." His fingers twitched slightly and her breath hitched. The doctors swarmed around him, working quickly, voices overlapping. "Stabilize him. Get the IV back in. Pressure dropping. Give him another dose." Amelia sat frozen beside them, her body shaking. She couldn't tear her eyes away. The man who had once walked through hell for her was now dragging himself back from it again, this time for their family. His lips moved faintly, barely a sound, but she caught it. Her name. Amelia. The whisper was weaker than air, but it was enough. Her tears fell faster, her voice trembling as she leaned close. "I'm here," she said. "We're here. All of us." The boys clutched his arm tighter, crying quietly. The room was chaos, yet somehow in that moment it felt like time itself bowed its head. Every beep of the monitor was a heartbeat of hope. Every breath he took, a promise clawed back from death. The doctors worked frantically, sweat beading their foreheads. But Amelia knew this wasn't medicine. This was will. His heart, though broken, still refused to surrender. Outside, the storm began to ease, the thunder fading to distant murmurs. The rain softened against the shattered windows, almost as if the heavens themselves were exhaling in relief. Amelia rested her forehead against his hand, whispering, "You're not done yet. Not until we're whole again." His pulse strengthened beneath her touch, faint but steady. The doctor looked up at her, disbelief giving way to awe. "He's stabilizing," he said softly. "He's coming back." Her eyes closed as a sob escaped her lips, half agony, half gratitude. She turned to the twins, pulling them into her arms, her voice trembling. "He's coming back to us," she whispered. Leo smiled through his tears, his small hand brushing Bairstow's fingers. "He heard us, Mom. He heard you." Amelia looked at the man who had just defied death again, her voice breaking into a whisper meant only for him. "You always do the impossible," she said, "even now." But deep in the hallway's shadows, unseen by them all, a man in a wet trench coat watched silently, phone pressed to his ear. "He's still alive," the voice said into the receiver. A pause, then a cold reply crackled through the line. "Then we'll finish what we started. Bairstow survives the sniper's bullet, but the unseen enemy still hunts him. The war between love and fate isn't over yet." The night had finally exhaled. After weeks of relentless rain and endless sirens, dawn broke over the city like a quiet apology. The hospital, once a fortress of chaos and gunfire, now stood wrapped in morning calm. The garden outside shimmered with dew, the air still carrying the faint scent of antiseptic and wet earth. From the third-floor window, sunlight slipped through the glass and bathed the recovery ward in gold. Bairstow sat there, motionless for a moment, watching the light trace the edges of the world he had nearly left behind. His hand rested on the arm of the wheelchair, bandaged fingers twitching slightly, as if remembering the recoil of that final gunshot. The scar beneath his ribs throbbed faintly, a reminder that death had brushed close, but failed to claim him. The nurse entered briefly, checking his vitals, but he barely noticed. His eyes were on the window, on the life blooming beyond it. For the first time in years, it wasn't the underworld that called to him. It was peace. Down below, Leo and Liam ran through the hospital garden, their laughter filling the courtyard like music. They chased the petals that fell from the blooming cherry trees, their voices cutting through the quiet morning air. Every giggle, every shout felt sacred, a sound he'd thought he'd never hear again. His heart, though stitched and scarred, felt whole for the first time. The image of their small hands gripping his in the ICU haunted him still, not with pain, but with purpose. They had been the anchor that pulled him back from death's edge. They were the reason he breathed now. The door opened quietly, and the sound of familiar footsteps drew his gaze. Amelia stepped in, her face illuminated by the soft glow of morning. She wore a simple beige coat, her hair loosely tied, strands catching the sunlight like threads of gold. There was no trace of the trembling woman from that bloody night, only calm strength and quiet heartbreak that time hadn't erased. She stopped a few feet from him, her hands folded in front of her, watching him with eyes full of stories unspoken. "You kept your promise," she said finally, her voice soft but steady, each word trembling with the weight of everything they had survived. Bairstow looked up at her slowly, a faint, tired smile curling his lips. "And you kept my heart beating," he replied, voice roughened by both pain and affection. The air between them carried more than words. It held forgiveness, grief, and the fragile kind of love that only exists between people who have already lost too much. She knelt beside his wheelchair, her fingers brushing over the back of his hand. His skin was still warm, his pulse faint, but alive beneath her touch. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world fell silent again. Just like that night when she had first opened her eyes and whispered his name. "I don't know if I can ever stop being afraid," Amelia murmured, her voice cracking slightly. "The world you come from, it still terrifies me. The violence, the blood, the secrets." Bairstow's gaze softened, guilt shadowing the corners of his expression. "Then let me build you one that doesn't," he said quietly. His hand rose, trembling slightly as he cupped her cheek. "No guns, no shadows, no enemies, just us. I'll give you that world, Amelia, I swear it." Her lips quivered, torn between faith and fear. "You've said vows before," she whispered, eyes glistening. "But this one can't break." He leaned closer, his forehead brushing hers gently. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving it never will." The sun slipped higher, its light washing over them like a blessing. Outside, the twins spotted their mother through the window and shouted with joy, "Mom, Dad, come see!" Their voices were bright, innocent, pure. Amelia smiled through her tears, and Bairstow felt something inside him heal in that sound, something that war and wounds could never touch. Together they went outside. He moved slowly, each push of the wheelchair a quiet victory. The spring air wrapped around him, alive with the scent of flowers and renewal. Leo and Liam ran to him instantly, throwing their small arms around his waist, laughter bubbling out like sunlight. "You're really okay now, Dad?" Leo asked, eyes wide. Bairstow smiled, his voice warm. "Better than okay. I've got my heart right here." He placed a hand over his chest, then pointed toward them. "Both halves of it." The boys giggled, their innocence a balm to every scar that marred his soul. Amelia stood behind them, watching, the picture of the life she had once dreamed of and lost, now breathing again before her eyes. They spent hours there. Bairstow told them stories, sanitized versions of his past that painted courage instead of crime. He laughed more in that morning than he had in years. Each sound of their joy stitched another piece of him back together. The nurses watched from afar, whispering softly. Everyone knew who he was, but for once, no one saw a monster, only a father, broken but reborn. Amelia sat beside him, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. "Do you ever think," she asked quietly, "that maybe we were meant to break before we could build?" He turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Maybe that's the only way people like us learn how to love right," he said. The day passed in golden fragments. The sun climbed, casting long shadows over the garden. The twins dozed on the grass, their heads resting on Amelia's lap. Bairstow watched them with a tenderness that ached in his chest. "They look like you," he said softly. "No," she replied, smiling faintly. "They have your stubbornness." He chuckled, though it hurt to do so. "Then God help us all." Their laughter mingled in the air, fragile but full of hope. Later, as the sun began to sink, Amelia wheeled him to the edge of the garden where the fountain glimmered in the fading light. Water danced in arcs, catching the orange glow of dusk. "Do you remember?" she said softly. "The night you promised me forever?" He nodded. "It was raining," he murmured. "You said forever was too long for people like us." She looked at him now, eyes gentle. "Then maybe forever starts here, with this." She placed her hand on his, fingers interlacing like roots beneath the soil. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The world around them blurred into silence. Only the faint murmur of water filled the air. It felt like an ending, and yet, somehow, a beginning. Bairstow leaned forward slightly, whispering, "Whatever happens next, remember this moment." Amelia smiled faintly. "Always." He exhaled, content, the shadows in his eyes softening at last. For the first time since he could remember, he felt safe. But peace, for men like him, was never without a cost. Far above them, on a distant rooftop across the street, a figure crouched behind a parapet. The sniper adjusted his scope. The red dot dancing through the air until it found its mark, centered on Bairstow's chest. Through the lens, the assassin watched the family framed in sunlight, the mother, the children, the man who refused to die. The voice crackled in his earpiece. "You have your target." A pause. "Make it clean." The sniper exhaled slowly, his finger tightening on the trigger. Down below, Bairstow felt something, an instinct, a whisper in the back of his mind. Years of surviving bloodshed had honed his senses too sharply to ignore it. He turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing toward the rooftops. For a fraction of a second, his gaze aligned with the sniper's scope, eye meeting eye through distance and glass. The assassin froze. The man in his crosshairs wasn't afraid. Bairstow's expression was calm, almost knowing. A faint smile touched his lips, as if daring fate to try once more. Then, without looking away, Bairstow reached for Amelia's hand. He squeezed it tightly, grounding himself in that single touch. "Whatever happens next," he whispered again, "you remember the promise?" She frowned, sensing something in his tone. "Bairstow?" He turned his face to her, the sunlight catching in his eyes. "If they come for me again, they'll have to go through everything I love first, and that's something they'll never survive." His voice was steady, but his eyes glimmered with something darker, quieter. Resolve. The sniper's finger trembled. The red dot hovered over his chest, then shifted, sliding off target. The man on the roof exhaled and lowered the rifle. Through the calm, a voice demanded, "Why didn't you fire?" He answered quietly, almost shaken, "Because he's already won." Below, the family remained unaware. The danger passed like a shadow dissolving in sunlight. The wind carried the petals of the cherry blossoms across the garden, landing softly on Bairstow's lap. He picked one up, studying it between his fingers, fragile, fleeting, beautiful. Amelia watched him, her voice soft. "What is it?" He smiled faintly. "Proof," he said, "that even things that fall can still be beautiful." She leaned in and kissed him, slow, trembling, full of everything words could never hold. The fountain shimmered behind them, the twins stirred and smiled in their sleep, and for a moment time itself seemed to bow in quiet respect. The vow they made beneath the morning light was simple but unbreakable: to love fiercely, to fight when the world demanded surrender, and to find peace even in a life built from war. And as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Bairstow closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of spring. The world he'd once ruled with fire now bloomed with forgiveness. He had survived the bullet of fate and chosen, finally, to live. Because sometimes the most powerful promise isn't whispered in darkness. It's kept beneath the light of a new dawn. If you felt every heartbeat, every tear, and every vow that love refused to let die, don't scroll yet. Their story isn't just about revenge, it's about redemption through pain and love that defied death itself. Follow Heartwoven Tales for more stories where emotions bleed, hearts break, and destiny never gives up. Because sometimes, even the coldest hearts remember who they beat for.